The night she laughed at me in front of her friends was the same night I decided to ruin her carefully curated world without ever raising my voice. Have you ever been in a room full of people and still felt completely alone? Worse, have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you love and wondered when they stopped looking at you the same way? Tell me in the comments. Would you stay with someone who humiliates you in front of others? Or would you walk away? Comment yes if you'd stay, and no if you'd leave. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect your heart, hit that subscribe button. This one's for you that we'd been together for 5 years. Emmeline was vibrant, magnetic, always the loudest in any room, and honestly, I used to love that about her. Where I was quiet, she was bold. Where I hesitated, she pushed forward. We made sense. At least, we used to. But lately, I'd been noticing things. The way she pulled her hand back a little faster when we held hands. The way she laughed just a little louder at other people's jokes. The way I started feeling more like a background prop than a partner. She planned this big dinner party at D'Amico's downtown, her favorite place, the kind of spot you had to make reservations weeks in advance. She said she wanted me there to meet her friends, to prove I wasn't as boring as I seem. I laughed when she said that. At least, I think I did. But a part of me couldn't shake the way she looked at me when she said it, like she was already embarrassed of who she was bringing. Still, I showed up. New shirt, fresh cut, flowers in hand, like this was our first date again. I told myself this was for her. That maybe tonight would be different. Maybe I was just overthinking. But, looking back now, that night was never about celebrating her birthday. It was the night everything I thought I knew burned to ash, and I stood right in the middle of it, smiling, not knowing the fire was already lit. The thing about betrayal is it never starts loud, but it's quiet at first. So quiet you almost convince yourself you're imagining it. It started with her laugh. Not just any laugh. That laugh. The one she used to save just for me. That unfiltered, eyes shut, full-body laugh she used to give when I said something stupid on purpose just to see her smile. But lately, she laughed harder at other people's jokes. Especially guys. Especially Ace. Ace Bean was a mutual friend. The kind you see at enough gatherings that you start calling them family, even when they're not. He was charming. Too charming. The type of guy who always had something slick to say and never seemed to miss a chance to compliment Emmeline. At first, I brushed it off. I wasn't the jealous type, but then came the texting. She was always on her phone, always smiling at something. I'd ask what was funny, and she'd say, just Anais being a clown, or, you wouldn't get it, inside joke. And maybe that was true. Maybe I really didn't get it. Nights out with Anais became more frequent. They used to be every few months. Then it was every few weeks. Then it was back-to-back Fridays. She'd come home smelling like perfume and someone else's cologne, claiming they just crashed at Anais's place after too many drinks. But Anais lived on the east side. We lived on the west. And Anais was known for being a light drinker, who never let guests stay past midnight. Still, I let it slide. Told myself not to be that boyfriend. The one who smothers her. The one who turns suspicion into sabotage. But 2 weeks before her birthday dinner, everything shifted. Tommy hosted a barbecue. Backyard, casual, a bunch of us from college and work. Emmeline came with me, like old times. She wore that sundress I used to love. The one that made her look like summered. We were all standing around the grill when I noticed it. That look. Ace said something dumb. Something about how Emmeline looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine, not sweating it out with the rest of us. I chuckled. Thought it was just his usual banter. But then she looked at him. Not just looked, lingered. Her eyes didn't just glance, they stayed. And when she laughed, it was soft. Different. Intimate. I felt it in my chest before my brain caught up. That small ache. The one that comes when something slips out of place in your life. And you know deep down it might never fit the same again. I remember going to the cooler just to catch my breath. Tommy came up beside me, offered me a beer, and said, "Everything good?" I smiled and nodded. But no, everything wasn't good. Something was breaking. I just didn't know yet how far the cracks ran. The night of her birthday dinner started like every performance does. Bright lights, fake smiles, and a stage full of liars pretending it's all loved. We pulled up to the restaurant in her car because, according to Emmeline, mine was too basic for a place like this. I didn't argue. I never did. D'Amico's was the kind of restaurant with chandeliers that cost more than my first car. Waiters wore gloves, and the water had a name I couldn't pronounce. She loved it. I could tell by the way her posture shifted when we walked in. Like she was slipping into a role she'd been rehearsing for weeks. Her friends were already at the table when we arrived. Anais, Kimberly, Tommy even showed up. And Ace, of course. Always Ace. The table buzzed with energy, drinks already flowing. Emmeline greeted everyone with kisses on cheeks, hugs that lasted a little too long, and that laugh, the one I used to think was mine. I sat down next to her, said hello to the group, and ordered a club soda. I hadn't even gotten my first sip before the jokes started. Anais, swirling her wine, turned toward me and said with a smirk, "So crew, how long did it take you to find this side of town?" Bet Google Maps was like, "You sure, man?" Laughter. I chuckled. Polite. Tight. Kept my eyes on the condensation running down my glass. But then Emmeline chimed in. She leaned back in her seat, one leg crossed over the other, a cocktail in her hand, and looked right at me as she said, "He still thinks buying me gas counts as romance. Isn't that cute?" The table exploded with laughter. Kimberly actually clapped. Ace let out this low whistle like he'd just heard a roast from a comedy special. And Emmeline, she beamed. She looked so proud of herself, like putting me down was just another party favor for the night. I felt my throat tighten. I forced a smile. Small, tight, hollow, and glanced around at a table of people who once called me friend. My hand wrapped around the silver fork on the table. Not to throw it, not to stab anything, just to remind myself I still had control over something. In that moment, I felt invisible. Not the kind of invisible where people forget your name, the kind where you realize the person you love has stopped seeing you long before you even noticed you were disappearing. And yet, I stayed seated. Because I wasn't ready to explode. I was ready to remember. Because this wasn't the end. This was the warning shot. She kept laughing, and I kept watching. Not just her. All of them. Anais wiping tears from her eyes like she just heard a stand-up routine. Ace with that smug, tilted grin like he'd just won something. And Emmeline, looking around like the queen of the table, soaking in every ounce of attention, completely unaware that the entire script had already flipped, because what she didn't know was that I had already seen everything. The messages, the hotel receipts, the late-night Uber trips to an address that didn't belong to Anais, but did belong to Ace, the fake sleepovers, the excuses, the lies dressed up as love. It all started a week before. I'd borrowed her iPad to double-check a payment while she was in the shower. Something small, harmless. She never logged out of iMessage. I didn't go looking. Not at first. But the moment a message popped up at the top corner that said, "Tell him you're at Anais's again," faced with tears of joy, I tapped, and what I saw after that tore something open inside me. Strings of messages, photos, videos, conversations about me like I was a blind, boring roommate they could joke about in between hotel room hookups. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just started collecting screenshots, dates, locations, times. Everything she thought was hidden behind a screen, now sitting neatly in a folder labeled truth. So as I sat there at that table, holding that fork, smiling like I hadn't watched my relationship rot in front of me for weeks, I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, scrolled to the message, pressed send. Then I leaned toward her, just close enough that no one else would hear, and I whispered, "Hey babe, check your phone." She looked confused, still tipsy, still riding the high of everyone laughing with her, until she pulled her phone from her clutch, tapped it open, and froze. The laughter stopped. She blinked at the screen. Her smile faltered. There, glowing bright under the restaurant lights, was a screenshot of her and Ace, tangled in the same text thread she swore didn't exist. A picture of them in his apartment. A timestamp from 2 weeks ago. And my message attached. Romantic enough now? Her hand slipped slightly. Her phone nearly dropped to the floor. N01 at the table was laughing anymore. Ace shifted in his seat. Anais went pale. Kimberly covered her mouth. And me? I just sat back. And finally, took the first deep breath I'd had in months. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Emmeline didn't say a word. Not wait. Not please. Not even what is this? She just sat there, her cocktail trembling in one hand, eyes locked on the message that shattered everything she'd been pretending to protect. I stood up, took my time folding my napkin, laid it neatly on the table. I looked across at Tommy. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't confused. He looked sad. I nodded once and said, "I'll Venmo you for my share." And then I walked out. I didn't look back. Not once. Because that chapter was done. The moment she chose applause over respect, loyalty over lust, it ended. But the story wasn't over. No, that night, I went home. To our apartment, still. Technically ours. And I got to work. First, I deleted myself from everything we shared. Streaming accounts. Grocery apps. The joint Spotify playlist she loved playing on road trips. Petty? Maybe. But it was mine, and I was done giving her pieces of me she didn't deserve. Next, I logged into the bank. Transferred my portion of the joint savings to an account under my name. Something I'd set up days earlier when I saw the first receipt from the Waverly Hotel, dated the night she told me she was comforting Anais after her breakup. Then I froze the credit card she used for her little shopping sprees. The same card I paid off every month. She'd feel that one the next time she tried to swipe it at Sephora. After that, it got serious. I opened my laptop, created a burner email and drafted a professional, anonymous message to her company's HR department. Subject line: inappropriate relationship between staff member and client. Inside, I detailed what I knew. Not everything. Just enough that I attached screenshots of their conversations. Redacted Ace's name in a few, left it exposed in others. Highlighted timestamps that overlapped with client appointments on her calendar. Then, I addressed it directly to Kimberly Spencer, her manager, the woman who just hours ago had laughed at me like I was nothing. This may be worth reviewing, considering company policy on client boundaries. I hit send, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless that I felt precise. Because while Emmeline built her image on smiles and social currency, I was now holding the one thing she could never take back. The truth. 3 days. That's how long it took for the cracks to turn into a collapse. She didn't call, didn't text. Not until that third night, close to midnight, when I heard the knock on my new apartment door, that I knew it was her before I even looked through the peephole. There was something desperate about the way the knocking started soft, then picked up, like she was trying to hold herself together, but couldn't anymore. I opened the door, and there she was, hair messy, eyes red, mascara streaked all the way down to her jawline. Her lips trembled as she opened them, but no words came out for a few seconds, just shallow, shaky breaths. I need to talk, she finally said. Please, crew, just 5 minutes. I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let her in. She stood in the middle of the living room, glancing around like she expected it to feel familiar, like she was hoping some trace of her still lived in the furniture, the air, the shadows, but there was nothing left here for her. I messed up, she whispered, voice cracking. It didn't mean anything. I was drunk half the time. It was just texting mostly. It wasn't what you think. I sat on the couch, still quiet, still calm. She kept talking, unraveling, tears falling, hands shaking, words tumbling over each other. But I'd already heard everything I needed, not from her mouth, but from her own recordings. That I reached for my phone, scrolled to the file I'd saved, and pressed play. Her voice came through the speaker, casual, flirty, soaked in confidence. Ace makes me feel like a real woman. Cruz just there. The room went silent. She stopped breathing for a second, like someone had cut off her air supply, and I just looked at her, the same way she looked at me that night at the table, like I was background noise. An accessory. Now she was the one staring, stunned, stripped bare by her own words. She sank onto the edge of the coffee table, face in her hands, sobbing. That I leaned forward slightly and said, "You broke us for someone who doesn't even want you sober." She didn't respond, just kept crying. Those deep, hollow sobs of someone who finally understands what they've lost. That I stood up, grabbed a small folder from the kitchen counter, and handed it to her. Inside was the lease termination, utility, transfer notices, and her final mail rerouting confirmation. "You have 1 hour," I said quietly. "Take what's yours and go. The lease is no longer in your name. You're not on the forwarding address." She looked up at me like I'd spoken another language, but I meant every word. The woman who laughed while destroying me didn't realize I wasn't the man she left behind anymore. And this apartment, this life, it had no more space for ghosts. Peace doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the sound of your own breath when you wake up and don't feel a knot in your chest. That I moved into a new condo on the north side. Nothing flashy, just clean floors, big windows, and no memories embedded in the walls. No shared keys, no shared Wi-Fi passwords, no perfume on the pillow next to mine. Just space to think, to feel, to rebuild. The first night I slept there, I sat on the floor eating takeout out of the bag, watching the ceiling fan spin. No TV, no music, just quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to go wrong. I started going on these Saturday morning hikes with a group I found online. Nothing serious, just a bunch of strangers breathing in fresh air and pretending not to be lonely. But somewhere between mile 3 and mile 5, I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. That I wasn't perfect. Still had bad nights. Still caught myself checking old photos by accident. But every day, I felt a little less broken, a little more me. And as for her, I don't really know where she ended up. I stopped checking, because closure doesn't come from watching someone suffer. It comes from not needing to watch it all. She laughed at me in front of everyone. That was the last time she ever got to.